هم میهنان محکومیت دیپلمات رژیم و
Fellow compatriots, the conviction of the Iranian regime diplomat and his 3 intelligence agents in a Belgian court is indeed the conviction of the clerical regime in its entirety. This is a momentous triumph for the Iranian people and resistance, and deals a heavy political and diplomatic blow to the clerical regime. The regime's diplomat-terrorist was sentenced to 20 years, and his accomplices were sentenced to 18, 17, and 15 years in prison. The Belgian citizenship of the 3 accomplices was revoked, and this was a heavy political and diplomatic blow to the clerical regime in Iran. It marks an end to deception by both factions of the regime to cover up the role in terrorist crime. It reveals the scandalous bankrolling of their agents to sustain the demonization campaign against the MEK and the Iranian resistance. It is an irreparable blow to the clerical regime strategy of exporting and spreading terrorism. Now, the verdict was read, and I could see the explosion of jubilation within each of your gathering across the world. And I'm confident that the Iranian people are now sharing with us the jubilation and joy. Of course, this is only the beginning. These victories will continue, and successive condemnations of the Iranian regimes within the international community, and ultimately in our federal homeland, Iran, this regime will be overthrown by the Iranian people, the resistance and resistance units, and the National Liberation Army of Iran. Indeed, the overthrow of the mullah's regime is the definitive demand of the Iranian people and resistance. Khamenei and his regime are entangled in a web of defeats and deadlocks. The terrorist plot to launch a mass slaughter in the resistance's grand gathering in Paris failed miserably. The regime's terrorist diplomat and other mercenaries were arrested, jailed, and put on trial. The regime's 2.5-year attempts to score deals or to blackmail governments to swap their terrorist diplomats all failed. Yes, indeed, the regime will continue to receive more setbacks and face more deadlocks until it is entirely overthrown and the people of Iran are free. Allow me first to thank the distinguished personalities who have been with the Iranian resistance through this journey.
To thank distinguished personalities who have been with the Iranian resistance in this campaign. I also extend my appreciation to those of you who joined us in this case as civil party. Today's conviction of the Iranian regime's diplomat-terrorist confirms the Iranian regime's state terrorism by a European judicial authority. The decision for this plot was taken by the highest regime body, namely the Supreme National Security Council and approved by Khamenei and Rouhani. The Ministry of Intelligence was ordered to execute the decision in close cooperation with the Foreign Ministry. The time has come for the European Union to take action. Silence and inaction under whatever pretext will only embolden the mullah's regime to continue its crimes and terrorism. The Iranian people expect that the EU revise its Iran policy and hold ruling theocracy accountable. After today's historic verdict, the Iranian people and resistance expect EU and other European countries to undertake the following steps, which are vital to dismantling the regime's terrorism network in Europe. Recall their ambassadors from Tehran and shut down the regime's embassies and centers in Europe, which are used for terrorism. The mullah's foreign minister must be held accountable. The entirety of the Ministry of Intelligence and the IRGC must be designated as terrorist entities. Europe must not grant refugee status or nationality to agents of the regime. They must be prosecuted and expelled. Any negotiations with the regime and the return to normal diplomatic status must be conditional on dismantling the mullah's terrorist network in Europe. Firmness is the correct answer to the mullah's blackmail and hostage-taking. Otherwise, they will continue this sinister policy. Thank you all for terrorism. The mullah's foreign minister must be held accountable. The entirety of the Ministry of Intelligence and the IRGC must be designated as terrorist entities. Justice is Mubarak, Mubarak, Mubarak. Piruzi Adalat, Mubarak, Mubarak.
The victory of justice, congratulate to all of you. Fellow compatriots, the Iranian resistance has successfully won a major legal and political battle. 2 decades ago, the mullahs sought to enchain the PMOI MEK and the organized resistance of the Iranian people by pursuing cases filed with false allegations and through terror listings in the US, UK, Germany, and France. But by relying on your sacrifices, the Iranian resistance shattered all those shackles and obstacles. Today, February the 4th, actually marks the 6th anniversary of the final ruling of the French judiciary, which struck down the allegation of terrorism against the Iranian resistance. It thus closed the June 17, 2003 dossier, which had been kept alive by the regime's appeals and, of course, by its spending of exorbitant sums of money. The appeal had been filed on behalf of a deceased agent of the Ministry of Intelligence, and it ultimately turned into a disgraceful defeat. Those days, the regime's dead and carcasses emerged out of every corner to crush the Iranian resistance, but they failed themselves. Those days, the Iranian resistance challenged the mullah's hirelings to file legal complaints and pursue their claims in court about allegations of, quote, suspicious death, quote, forced divorces, and, quote, financial fraud. But they failed to do so. On that day, justice in Europe exonerated the Iranian resistance from the trumped-up charge of terrorism and other similar allegations arising from the June 17 dossier, which included some 100,000 pages. But today, justice in Europe condemned real terrorism and terrorists operating under the banner of Islam and Shiism, namely the clerical regime, religious dictatorship. It is befitting today to congratulate the people of Iran on this ruling because they are the main victims of the regime's terrorism and suppression. This is the result of the ultimate sacrifices made by martyrs, from Professor Kazem Rajavi, the great martyr for human rights, to other opponents of the regime who lost their lives as a result of terrorist operations carried out by the regime outside Iran over the past 4 decades. Yes, this is the result of the ultimate sacrifices by the martyrs that have affected the regime. Dear compatriots and friends, during the trial of the regime terrorist diplomat, his lawyer said, "My client feels that it is not himself, but his government that is on trial." Yes, the main party tried by the court in Antwerp in Belgium was indeed the mullah's regime. This development revealed significant facts. The fact that the clerical regime has organized an extensive network for its state-sponsored terrorism. The fact that the regime feels threatened and desperate to counter its democratic alternative, and thus it is prepared to take enormous risks. And the fact that all the regime factions are united and collaborate with each other in carrying out terrorist crimes. In other words, when it comes to savagery and pure evil, moderates and hardliners constantly try to upstage one another. For years, in order to justify the policy of appeasement, the regime apologists promoted the illusion that it is only a rogue international faction that carries out the regime terrorist plots. But 2.5 years of investigations into this issue has now confirmed that the entire clerical regime has been involved in terrorism, including this specific plot. The head of Belgium's State Security Service said that intelligence officials had determined that planned bombing was a state-sanctioned operation approved in Tehran. Yes, this was not Assadi's personal initiative. Yes, this is not a rogue faction at work. This is the entire regime that is engaged in rogue and hostile behavior against humanity. It is the entirety of this regime that has established an organized infrastructure of state-sponsored terrorism to evade its own downfall. The mullahs advanced their foreign policy on the basis of terrorism. They advanced terrorism under the cover of foreign policy. Besides, there is absolutely no daylight between the regime's institutions when it comes to committing crimes and terrorism. The terrorist Quds force is practically integrated with the regime's foreign ministry in many years. And in most cases, the foreign minister himself acts as a servant and lackey of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. As Javad Zarif himself has pointed out, he used to meet with the terror master and eliminated Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani every week in order to coordinate the activities of the foreign ministry. 2 years ago, Javad Zarif openly told the regime's parliament, quote, "We, the foreign ministry, do not have a system that acts on its own volition. Can we really do something in this country without reporting it?" End of quote. He emphasized, quote, "We have never sought to do anything contrary to the commands of His Eminence, the leader Khamenei." End of quote. Indeed, Mis- indeed, Mr. Radoslaw Sikorski, MEP and former Polish foreign minister, was correct to say that, quote, "Zarif is a smiling Ribbentrop," referring to the Nazi foreign minister. It is indeed an apt comparison. Dear friends, dear compatriots, a decade ago, the leader of the Iranian Resistance, Masoud Rajavi, said, "The policy of appeasement grants the murderous mullahs the opportunity to brutally suppress the people of Iran and carry out daily execution, to continue their export of terrorism to Iraq, Afghanistan, and other countries in the Middle East, to prolong their nuclear weapons program, and to extend the range of their missiles and explosives to Europe." This is what has happened. Although they achieved some of their objectives under the auspices of the policy of appeasement, the endurance of the National Council of Resistance as the only viable democratic alternative to the regime, the Iranian people's persistent uprisings over the years, as well as the ultimate price paid in blood by our people and resistance, put an end to the era of appeasement of the mullahs. No one can ever revive this lifeless and buried policy. I repeat, no one can ever revive this lifeless and buried policy. The historic ruling by the Court of Antwerp confirmed this fact. The court and its long investigations in Belgium and Germany also revealed a series of the regime's political and intelligence schemes and tricks. The regime's terrorist diplomat had been crisscrossing at least 11 European countries to hand out money to the regime's operatives, spies, and informants. The cash was paid to agents involved in the regime's demonization campaign that paves the way for terrorist plots against the PMOI and the Iranian Resistance. But the most important tactic revealed and foiled along with this terrorist plot was blaming the conspiracy on the MEK itself. All of course, this is the routine practice. But now, this was defeated in an international court. On the very day the regime's terrorist diplomat was arrested, the mullah's foreign minister, who was personally involved in the plot, tried to suggest that the MEK itself was the culprit. Therefore, this issue goes beyond the conviction of an individual diplomat of the regime. It is a political defeat for the mullahs, a judicial conviction for the regime, and the neutralization of many of its policies and tactics. I would like to extend my gratitude to all the honorable dignitaries who participated in this trial as private plaintiffs. I would like to thank 240 members of European parliamentarians, 22 former European ministries and statesmen, and I see many of them here, and members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe who have called for a change in policy vis-à-vis the Iranian regime in all aspects. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. I would like to remind all governments and international institutions that the clerical regime terrorism is not distinct from its domestic suppression or from its nuclear weapons program. Neither is it distinct from its warmongering and crimes in the Middle East or from its missile program. Efforts to contain and control the regime's nuclear program will not succeed until they are coupled and linked with a firm stance against violations of human rights of the people of Iran and with the eviction of the mullahs from the Middle East, as well as the dismantling of the regime's missile program. The day after the conclusion of the nuclear deal between the regime and the P5+1, I reiterated on behalf of the Iranian resistance that if the P5+1 had been firm, the Iranian regimes would have had no other option but to fully retreat and permanently abandon its efforts to acquire a nuclear weapon. And specifically, it would have abandoned uranium enrichment and completely shut down its bomb-making projects. We also pointed out that one must decisively insist that the regime must stop meddling in and withdraw its forces from the entire Middle East. On that same day, we emphasized that any agreement that overlooks the Iranian people's human rights only encourages suppression and ceaseless executions by the regime and trample upon the rights of the people of Iran, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the United Nations Charter. Over the past 6 years, each of these facts and assertions has been proven one by one. Today, what we say is this: the conviction of the clerical regime in the court of Antwerp is a very significant step, but it must be continued until the regime's terrorism apparatus is dismantled. Western governments must prevent the Iranian regime from exploiting their legal, diplomatic, banking, and technological resources, as well as their democratic conditions, to advance its terrorist objectives. They must prevent the regime from deceiving Western intelligence services and from taking advantage of such contacts to protect its own terrorists. Yes, they must prevent the regime from painting its agents and political opponents while disguising its espionage and terrorist activities under the cover of opposition to the MEK. Yes, beyond its legal repercussions, the ruling by the Court of Belgium bears certain obligations for Europe and the international community. Therefore, as prominent European parliamentarians and dignitaries have declared, the Iranian resistance once again calls on governments of Europe to ensure to change their approaches and policies and including shut down the regime's embassies and other centers in Europe, all of which are hubs for terrorism. Hold the regime's foreign minister accountable. It was proven that his ministry and the embassy and diplomat under his control were involved in planning and preparing for the potential mass slaughter. Designate the entire Ministry of Intelligence and the IRGC as terrorist entities. Prosecute the regime leaders who are in charge and are the masterminds of its terrorism infrastructure. They must face justice. The mullahs, intelligence agents, and mercenaries under any cover must be prosecuted and expelled. Granting them refugee status or citizenship must be considered a red line. And the decision that today, fortunately, the court in Antwerp took in Belgium, any form of normalization of diplomatic relations with the regime must be made contingent on dismantling its terrorism infrastructure and on the observance of the human rights of the people of Iran. Compatriots, sisters and brothers, the mullah's regime relies on terrorism and suppression to survive. The momentous legal and judicial blow to its strategy of exporting terrorism is therefore an achievement for all those oppressed by this regime and all the courageous souls who stand up to it. They include the families of young Baluchis who are savagely executed by Khamenei, women and youth who suffer under maximum repression, the impoverished people whose shelters are raised by the mullahs, and the tens of millions of people who are suffering from COVID-19 pandemic, and yet the mullahs have refused to purchase vaccines, thereby leaving people without any defenses against the disease. Yes, this is an achievement for all the people of Iran against the vicious regime of the mullahs. I congratulate you all. Justice and this victory should be congratulated to all of you. Dear friends, compatriots, the Iranian Resistance's momentous legal and political campaign against the political regime triumphed. Our objective was neither to receive reparations nor to retaliate or take revenge. Rather, we want the machinery of terrorism and suppression of our people dismantled and replaced by our people's sovereignty and universal suffrage. I salute my dear sister Ingrid Betancourt, who once said, quote, our voice is the voice of faith and a voice of conviction in justice. We are convinced that justice is our answer to suppression and terrorism. End of quote. I hail Ingrid for being present here as a witness to this historic trial.
همیهنان عزیز خواهران و برادران گرامی
My dear compatriots, sisters and brothers, in just 3 days, we mark the anniversary of the epic martyrdom of Ashraf Rajavi and Musa Khiyabani, two prominent leaders of the resistance. 6 days from today is the anniversary of the 1979 revolution, whose leadership was usurped by Khomeini, engulfing it in a quagmire of reactionary ideology and repression. From the day after that great revolution in February to the martyrdom of leading PMI members and the massacre of political prisoners to the Eternal Light operation in 1988 and the 14-year steadfast perseverance in Ashraf, our blood-drenched struggle and resistance with its 120,000 martyrs against the augury of fundamentalism has been about our people's freedom and sovereignty. True great epics, Masoud Rajavi once said, are created through such struggles and, of course, with great suffering and sacrifices. But with great suffering and sacrifices, they are achieved. Hail to Masoud Rajavi, whose leadership, the 50-year leadership against the mullah's regime, has established such a tremendous resistance and every day moves forward. And now, by all indications, we are moving toward the end of this struggle, towards our great destination, and toward eventual freedom for the people of Iran. The victory in the court of Belgium follows the Iranian resistance's victories in more than 20 other courts in Europe and the United States, all of which were important steps in this path. This struggle will carry on until all the leaders of the clerical regime face justice, until the overthrow of the mullah's religious dictatorship, and until final victory and freedom. Hail to Iran's courageous youth and to the brave members of resistance units. Hail to freedom, hail to the people of Iran, and I salute you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome a renowned friend of the Iranian resistance. Joining us now from France is former Colombian senator and presidential hopeful Ingrid Betancourt.
I salute you all, my friends, those in Iran who have suffered so much under the Iranian regime, those in the prisons of Iran that have been detained arbitrarily, all the political hostages, all the civilians, all the victims and survivors of this regime, my dear friends of the MEK, and all of you who are present in this virtual session that have been the force and the heart to fight for democracy in Iran. I salute you with emotion, with deep emotion, and with a heart full of hope, because this is Judgment Day. Today, justice has been rendered. This is a day for celebration and thanksgiving. And I want first of all to honor the Antwerp Tribunal and honor its historical and courageous verdict. Assadollah Assadi and 3 of his accomplices have been convicted with maximum sentences of 20, 18, and 15 years in prison, respectively. It is a victory. It is a victory for all the victims of terrorism in the world. It is a victory for all of us, because had the plot been successful, it would have led to a carnage with hundreds of casualties, murdering Maryam Rajavi, murdering many other very dear friends to us, and also killing you and me, present in this virtual celebration day. It is our victory because for the first time in history, a diplomat from a terrorist state has been convicted. A state that pressured and blackmailed and took civilian hostages, civilians with dual citizenship that were just visiting relatives in Iran. Yes, they were and still are arbitrarily imprisoned to force the Belgian courts into granting impunity to the regime's proxies. Therefore, this is a turning point in history because justice prevailed in spite of all Iranian's regime criminal attempts to avoid justice. This is the day the terrorist nature of the Iranian state has been exposed to the world. This condemnation puts an end to the false narrative that the Iranian regime of the mullahs is a democracy. This judgment has shown to the world that Iran is governed and in the hands of a terrorist organization. This trial has proved that the Paris terrorist plot was ordered by the Iranian terrorist state. It has demonstrated that those who planned to kill us were not isolated lunatics, but loyal servants of the Iranian supreme leader, Khamenei, of the Iranian president, Rouhani, and his foreign minister, Javad Zarif. They were the ones recruiting them, training them, paying them. The decision to launch this terrorist attack was taken by the Supreme National Security Council under Rouhani's personal watch and leadership. It was confirmed by the Supreme Leader Khamenei himself. And then it was assigned to the Ministry of Intelligence and Security to implement the terrorist plan in close cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The sheer madness of this attempt to kill thousands of innocent people illustrates the sheer madness of a bloodthirsty regime obsessed by the fear of being overthrown by its own people. The Iranian regime's terrorist plot was primarily targeting my dear sister, friend, Maryam Rajavi, in a desperate attempt to annihilate any democratic option for the Iranian people. What a terrible political miscalculation. But the regime took this insane risk of operating in European soil to destroy its opposition, launching this terrorist operation because it was vital for it to strike at the MEKs as the existential threat to the survival of a regime shaken by years of streets, protests, and riots. It was not the first time the Iranian regime committed terrorist acts in European soil. They have a long history of international crimes. The Iranian regime has been engaged in terrorism for over 40 years now. But this is the first time an Iranian diplomat has been caught red-handed. The evidence is so overwhelming that it's not possible to disguise the truth anymore. This regime is run by a gang of dangerous terrorists coveting the nuclear bomb to export and consolidate their terrorist grip internationally. Assadollah Assadi and 3 of his accomplices were charged with the counts of attempted terrorism with the intention to kill and activities within a terrorist entity. Well, let's make it clear. This terrorist entity is no other than the Iranian government. The 2-year investigation against Assadollah Assadi revealed that he was running an important network of spies and terrorists all over Europe. During his years as a diplomat in Vienna, he visited more than 300 different places where he duly posted his agents. When he was arrested, the police found in his car receipts of monthly payments of a number of his accomplices. Millions of euros were paid to these Iranian proxies and terrorist agents, and 500,000 only to the ones charged with bombing the NCRI annual gathering. The proof of the Iranian regime involvement in state terrorism against European citizens is now a recorded fact by an European court. Iranian's regime terrorist nature is now an undeniable fact of history. Therefore, this judgment calls for a severe European response. First, Europe cannot continue doing business as usual with Iran. No more accommodation, no more submitting our principles and our values to private or public economic interests. No more nuclear accord with Iran. We can't continue kneeling to the pressure of Iran. We need to stop them. Second, Europe has to close the Iranian terrorist centers all over Europe. This means closing Iranian embassies. We cannot make any other mistake. We have to close those embassies if we want to protect our nationals. And only under the condition of dismantling the regime's terrorist apparatus can Europe accept to return to normal relations, if we can call normal relations with a government of criminals and terrorists. Third, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Javad Zarif, has to be held accountable for this crime. Therefore, he must know that he's not welcome in Europe. We need our European leaders in parliaments and in office in government to refrain from inviting him or holding talks with him. He should be in jail with Assadi. And we should have an order, an international order, to go and get him. Fourth, the Ministry of Intelligence and Security has to be designated as a terrorist organization, which is what it is. Fifth, the European leaders have to reveal, have to denounce, and have to reject the Iranian regime blackmail policy. Six, we call, and I do, from the bottom of my heart, all the leaders in office in Europe to support the Iranian people in their struggle to claim back their democracy. And in particular, I pledge that we recognize the NCRI, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, and its president-elect, Maryam Rajavi, as a valid democratic voice and counterpart in talks to open the path for a democratic transition in Iran. Thank you all, and let's celebrate this day of truth and justice.
My dear Ingrid, for your inspiring speech. Your support means so much for us. No one can deny that you can recognize very well a terrorist regime. You have experienced such misinformation campaign during your captivity. You suffered a lot, so your words count. You are one of the pioneers in this field and a civil party in this court. Therefore, all members of the Iranian resistance consider you as a member of their family and respect you a lot. This international campaign will continue until all the leaders, as you said, of regime face justice and until the downfall of this regime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ingrid. Our next speaker, everyone, is truly a remarkable man. He's the foreign minister of Italy from 2011 to 2013, a great friend of the Iranian people and the Iranian resistance. Please welcome the Honorable Giulio Terzi.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, President-elect of the National Council of Resistance, Iran, today, for all the friends of the resistance and all the friends of the true friends of the Iranian people, is a moment of great joy. Is a great joy because justice has been rendered. So rare, but so real, justice rendered today. And this is a satisfaction, a moment when we have to believe also that justice rendered so rarely must be rendered again for other extremely important instances, which are the crimes committed by the heinous regime of the mullahs. Justice must be rendered for the 1988 massacre, for the individual killings of people, dignitaries belonging to the resistance, for political refugees in Europe. And today, it is As you said, Madame Rajavi, it is the conviction of the regime. It is the day. Today is the day. Is the day when the entire world, especially those who still appease the mullah's regime, must become aware that the mask is finally off, that the Iranian regime is a certified and with the evidence given and decided by a court, a very important court in Antwerp, the Iranian regime is a terrorist state. The Assadi and his accomplices trial has already gone a long way toward publicly revealing how the terrorist plot was undertaken with the full knowledge and the blessing of the Iranian authorities. The judges have established that Assadi acted on behalf of the state of Iran. There were reports that the regime's blessing came specifically from both the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and the President Hassan Rouhani. And this underscores the fundamental unity between the so-called hardline and so-called reformist factions that share power within the regime. It is furthermore with the knowledge of Foreign Minister Javad Zarif that Iran has been engaged and is engaging in acts of terrorism. In fact, the regime, and in particular Foreign Minister Zarif, are criminally using the kidnapping of foreign or dual citizens. They are using innocent people in order to seek prisoner exchanges with Assadi, as demonstrated by the fact that the execution of Professor Jalali was halted after intense contact between foreign ministers of Sweden, Belgium, Italy, and Mr. Zarif. And that the same execution was announced and then suspended according to a meticulously conceived script made public in order to influence the trial in Belgium. As resulted in Assadi's case, it is now the time to strongly condemn and halt the regime's use of diplomatic cover to carry out terrorist attacks, and the necessary practical warnings should be given to Tehran. First and foremost, the closure of all its embassies and the expulsion of its ambassador and diplomats every time there is an evidence of terrorist activity or support that is detected by the European state intelligences or police. With no more hesitation, European leaders must recognize in dealing with Iran that is a regime which is the #1 in the world as state sponsor of terrorism, a regime which fuels wars by proxies in the entire Middle East, which support murderous, corrupt dictators in their grasp on power, which props up by contributing to their illicit trade every sort of international outlaws of criminal organizations and individuals. European-Iranian relations must be made contingent upon the regime taking concrete steps to dismantle its terrorist infrastructure and halt its malign activity, especially on Western soil. In this way, there is a substantial mounting pressure in the European public opinion and among EU institutions in favor of a much more assertive response to terrorist planned attacks, such as the one organized in Villepinte. Europe's lack of proper action has emboldened the Iranian authorities, and it has emboldened them in the pursuit of their malign activities, including terrorism in Europe, convincing them that they have impunity and that whatever they do in Europe, even bombing a peaceful rally which could lead to hundreds and perhaps thousands of deaths, there will be no consequences. Europe has its own share of huge responsibility about the current situation. Now it is the time, today is the day for a new approach to tackle the terror regime. And today's Antwerp verdict represents the watershed that nails down its responsibility to these responsibilities an entire regime that slaughters its own people and that must no longer remain unpunished by the international community. And in fact, we must be overthrown by the uprising of the Iranian people and the action of the National Council of Resistance of Iran and the support of all its friends around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Terzi.
you, Mr. Foreign Minister Terzi, for your remarks, speech, your support for the Iranian resistance, and your active presence in all gathering is very inspiring, especially you are one of the civil party of this important court, and I'm sure that we will win together, and in this struggle, we'll continue until then. Thank you very much.
At this point, I have the privilege of introducing another great friend of the Iranian resistance. We have with us right now the Minister of State and former Prime Minister of Albania. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Pandeli Maiko.
Dear friends, the evaluation of a state starts from the way how it respects the international rules. This relationship with the international rules define the status of the state. Official Tehran presents itself time after time as a victim of violating international rules. Today, with the trial that is taking place in Belgium against the diplomats of the Iranian regime, it shows a dramatic picture. This is a clear view of the misuse of the international law by the official Tehran. The trial proved the involvement of a state structure of the Iranian regime in a terrorist act in the heart of the European Union. The trial in Belgium is an important act. This trial clearly separates the role of the victim and the protagonist of a violence. Today, the trial in Belgium has placed the Iranian regime under a serious charge. As such, this process is of great importance. It is more important than a statement or a protest note. Official Tehran must face now an unprecedented situation into international relations. Iran will have diplomats jailed by a court order, charged with acts of terrorism. Having diplomats in prison on such serious charges is an expression of the misuse of the international trust toward a state. Today's event is very important. The imprisonment of the Iranian diplomats who have carried out official orders today clarifies Iran's international status. He points out why Iranian state leaders have imprisoned their country. Iran leaders today are faced with international law and the public opinion at home and abroad. This is a cost that should not be paid by the Iranian people. Such a situation stands with the Iranian people and their desire for regime change by supporting the democratic alternative and the plan and the platform of President Maryam Rajavi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, Mr. Maiko, for your support. You are one of the most popular, honest, and noble political personalities in Albania. You have the respect of all the political parties and the people of Albania. You are also an honorable and generous friend of the people Mujahedin and the Iranian Resistance. You have always defended their rights and their desire for freedom and democracy. Thank you for your supporting the international campaign against Mullah's state terrorism. Terrorism of the religious fascism ruling Iran is against Albania, the people of Albania, and the Iranian people, and all people of the world. Once again, thank you very much.
I now have the honor to present to you a great supporter and friend of the Iranian resistance, the first U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Governor Tom Ridge.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you on what I consider to be a fairly historic day. And in thinking about the significance of this day, I was reminded of a passage from a Shakespearean play, which is often used by others in a variety of different forms. But Shakespeare wrote, "The truth will out." The world owes a debt of gratitude to the Belgian people, the Belgian State Security Service, and the Belgian judicial system. They did not turn away from seeking the truth. They accepted the responsibility to find the truth, to gather information behind a planned bombing of a public event in the outskirts of Paris in July of 2019, and to identify those responsible for even planning such a reprehensible act. The Iranian diplomat Assadollah Assadi worked with 3 accomplices in an effort to achieve the objective set by the leaders of Iran, particularly the Ministry of Intelligence Security Affairs. The objective simply being the bombing of an event hosted by the National Council of Resistance in Iran and attended by literally thousands of individuals, including diplomats from multiple countries from around the world. The world should ask why, and then the truth will out. The NCRI is an immediate threat to the repressive Iranian regime. It is the largest, best organized, and most popular democratic alternative to the regime. And over the years, its leaders and its advocacy, and their advocacy for a peaceful, tolerant, democratic, non-nuclear Iran has attracted greater and greater internal support within the people of Iran and greater international support. And that was evidenced by the incredible number of political representatives from countries around the world attending that event, all of whom were potential targets of the Iranian conceived and supported terrorist plot. The regime's fear of a democratic alternative, attracting even greater and greater domestic and international support, was and still remains so intense, it directed one of its diplomats to oversee this plot, collaborate with the accomplices, act as a courier for the explosives, and coordinate the activity with the Iranian government. The truth will out. The planned bombing was a state-sponsored event. It is time for all freedom-loving nations to take notice, not only of this event, but the words of President Bush in his State of the Union address as far back as 2002, when he condemned the Iranian regime for its aggressive pursuit of weapons of mass destruction. He described the leadership of the regime as, and I quote, "an unelected few seeking to repress the Iranian people's hopes for freedom." And the NCRI certainly reflects those hopes and has grown stronger and stronger every year. And for the past 20 years, the regime's effort to suppress the truth and eliminate any efforts to bring democracy and freedom to Iran has been brutally but unsuccessfully sustained. The regime has killed dissidents. It has not killed their quest for freedom. In light of the findings of the Belgian court, the world, particularly our allies, must also remind themselves that Iran has continued to subsidize terror in the Middle East, support regional proxies in Syria in Iraq, imprison or murder democratic dissidents, advance its ballistic missile technology, and accelerate its plutonium enrichment. The planned bombing was a state-sponsored operation by a terrorist state that continues to operate with arrogance, with impunity, with disdain for human rights and common decency, and the basic norms of a civil society. The European Union, the United States, and nations around the world must applaud the courage and the diligence of the Belgian government, its judicial system, and their citizens, and loudly, resoundingly condemn the action of the Iranian government. But rhetorical condemnation without further action will have a little impact on this rogue regime, who heretofore has totally been unwilling to change its behavior. Countries whose citizens were in harm's way in that July event should consider downgrading, seriously considering downgrading diplomatic relationships with Iran. The operation of the Ministry of Intelligence and Security Affairs, that whole shop, should be labeled a foreign terrorist organization. It's the best way to hold them accountable worldwide. And we need to hold the foreign minister accountable in some fashion. I'll let the diplomats figure that one out, for his use of the diplomatic pouch, the diplomatic corps, the embassies and the missions as hubs for their terrorist activity. And there's one final action that countries who have repudiated and condemned the Iranian government for not only this terrorist act, but its terror and repression over previous decades, that I think would be the most powerful and the most meaningful of all. These countries and their leaders should align themselves with the hopes of the Iranian people for freedom. I would call on them to recognize publicly the National Council for Resistance in Iran as the alternative to the existing regime. That is the ultimate, that's the ultimate condemnation of their action. In that fashion, the truth will out. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to share with you my thoughts on this very important day.
To see you, you have personal experience against terrorism, and you have supported our movement in the difficult days in Ashraf and Liberty, and you were at the side of the Ashrafis and the Iranian resistance. And now, in the international campaign against mullahs' terrorism, your active role was very important, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In this part of the conference, we're honored to have joining us a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 1995 to 2011, an old-time supporter of the Iranian resistance. Please help me welcome the Honorable Patrick Kennedy.
Today is a historic day. Today is a day that there's no turning back from. It's a turning point for the European community and the rest of the world, not only with the regime in Iran, but particularly with their representative, Foreign Minister Zarif. You see, we've always known Iran to be behind numerous acts of terrorism, not only throughout Europe, but throughout the world. But today, the evidence is overwhelming. Today, the evidence is damning. The Iranian regime was caught red-handed. They're not denying it. Their only defense is to plead diplomatic immunity, as if diplomatic immunity protected terrorism. This is why we should demand Foreign Minister Zarif clean house throughout every Iranian embassy throughout Europe. of all IRGC and all MOIS agents. Because in their defense, Assadi said that they are essentially using the whole diplomatic corps as a foreign operation for their terrorism and their exploits. Either Foreign Minister Zarif can prove that he's cleared out all embassies of terrorist organizations, including, as I said, IRGC and MOIS, who conduct numerous terrorist acts around the world and especially within Iran itself against their own people. It's time we face the facts. Either call them out on cleaning house or shut those embassies down. Make it very clear to the mullahs in Iran that we know that their existential threat was Maryam Rajavi and the PMOI and the NCRI, because that's who they were targeting. It's not anyone's claim that NCRI and Maryam Rajavi are an existential threat to Iran. The proof is in this trial. The proof is, why would the whole Iranian diplomatic system go to such lengths to seek to blow up a rally celebrating democracy and freedom coming to the Iranian people? That clearly is the enemy of the current regime in Iran, that is wreaking havoc over human rights in Iran. We have seen it not only in the 1988 massacre of over 30,000 protesters, but we have seen it in numerous massacres since, especially in the last few years of uprisings. It's time to face the facts. It's time to call Iran for what it is, a terrorist state. It's time to expel their diplomats. It's time that we have a new Iran, that we support NCRI, we support the 10-point plan of Maryam Rajavi, and that we support a new day for all Iranians who can finally be freed of this terrorist regime, who terrorizes not only Iranians, but terrorizes the world. Man Irani Hastam. Long live the people of Iran.
Thank you, Congressman Kennedy, for your support for democracy and human rights in Iran. You have always stood with the Iranian people and their desire for change. The Iranian people and resistance will never forget the day you cried loud and clear that I am an Ashrafi and I am an Iranian. These supports will always be remembered in our history, and the Iranian people are encouraged with your friendship. And now the international campaign against human rights violations in Iran and mullahs terrorism must continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Now let's go to France, where we are joined by a member of the French National Assembly, President of the French Parliamentary Committee for a Democratic Iran. It is my honor to present to you the Honorable Michel de Vaucouleurs.
Bonjour mes chers amis.
Hello, hello, dear friends. Dear President of the Parliamentary Committee for a Democratic Iran, I was present in Villepinte with tens of thousands of participants whilst a terrorist plot was being arranged under the leadership of Assadollah Assadi. Can you hear me clearly? So I really greet the strong decision, the strong verdict given by the court, an exemplary verdict. I don't know if you can hear me well.
Je salue le jugement ferme et exemplaire qui condamne Assad.
I salute the strong verdict given which condemns Assadollah Assadi by refusing to welcome the diplomatic immunity that he was trying to seek cover under. How could it, in fact, be possible to grant him this immunity whilst the evidence was proven to show that his diplomatic immunity status was used in order to set up in Europe a terrorist cell using a diplomatic bag in order to transport the bomb? The verdict has demonstrated clearly that these actions are not those of an isolated person, but rather commanded by the regime as an attempt to hit directly the president of the NCRI, Madame Maryam Rajavi in France. This also should show a complete turnaround with the relationships between France and the Iranian regime. We must stop basing our diplomatic relationships on some vain hope for that regime to behave democratically. We must not accept a diplomacy that is just shown as a cover for a country able to foment a terrorist plot on our soil. The diplomatic relations with the Iranian regime should be suspended and only take part again when there is a democratic transition, as is shown and demanded by President of the NCRI, Madame Maryam Rajavi. It is time for France and Europe to support this democratic transition. France and Europe must meet this historic point. I thank you very much. Many thanks, dear Michel, for your support. This is a historic day indeed, and your speech and your presence as the representative of the French people shows your commitment against religious fascism and as you're standing for freedom and democracy in Iran. Many thanks once again.
I would like to introduce to you a member of the British Parliament and an invaluable friend of the Iranian people and resistance. Please welcome the Honorable Steve McCabe.
Madam Rajavi, friends in Ashraf 3, I'm very pleased to be able to join you today. These are historic events in Antwerp. A diplomat from the Iranian regime has been found guilty of a terrorist plot and given the maximum sentence of 20 years. But it's not just Assadollah Assadi and his co-conspirators who are guilty. His masters in Tehran must also be held accountable. If there's a symmetry about today's speeches, it's because we've all come to similar conclusions. This trial has exposed for all to see how the Iranian authorities show contempt for diplomatic conventions by using their embassies and diplomatic missions to export terror and carry out terrorist operations. That's not how a normal government behaves, even at times of genuine difference, tensions, and difficulties. It's the actions of a pariah state, a regime that for years has taken advantage of diplomatic privileges and opportunities, not to further understanding, improve communication, and resolve difficulties, but to plan, export, and support terrorist activity
and murder around the globe. Today's sentence is proof of what they have denied for so long. Assadollah Assadi didn't deny the charges or express any regret. Instead, he asserted that the diplomatic status conferred on him by his masters in Tehran meant he was above the law and should go free. He refused to recognize the court in Antwerp. He showed contempt for the Belgian people, contempt for the French people, and utter disdain for the hundreds of innocent people he planned to murder. The Iranian foreign minister defended him. The Iranian authorities had the temerity to accuse the French, German, and Belgians of violating diplomatic norms. Violating diplomatic norms for apprehending a terrorist, foiling a bomb plot, and prosecuting the culprits. That tells you all you need to know. He and his co-conspirators have got the sentence justice demands. The West now needs to show steely determination in making sure it's carried out. There can be no backdoor deals, no let-off, no swaps for innocent hostages seized by the mullahs for the express purpose of using them as bargaining chips with the deliberate intention of seeking the release of terrorists like Assadi. This is the time for tougher action, stronger sanctions, reduced diplomatic privileges, and reconsideration of our longer-term relations with this regime. I believe we can't do business with them because we can't ever trust them, and there's no point in pretending otherwise. Terrorists are terrorists, no matter how they dress or what they call themselves. And terrorists can't represent legitimate governments. They can't negotiate with democratic governments, and they can't enjoy conventional diplomatic relations. They're a cancer, and they should be rooted out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe. Thank you for your support and your efforts. Today is a historic day and is a victory for all freedom lovers in the world, and we'll continue our struggle until the end to establish freedom and democracy in Iran. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're now going to hear from a wonderful friend who has stood beside Ashrafis through thick and thin. Please welcome the former senior anti-terrorism officer of the coalition forces in Iraq, Colonel Wesley Martin.
Mrs. Rajavi, members of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, all guests and dignitaries, and especially my fellow soldiers for democracy, who we serve so closely together at Camp Ashraf. Thank you for allowing me to join you today. All events with the NCRI and the MEK bring together people throughout the world to show support for an Iran that one day will achieve the 4 freedoms stated by President Franklin Roosevelt: the freedoms of speech, of worship, from want, and from fear. The failed 2018 attack was as much against those freedoms as it was against the participants at the rally outside Paris. This attempted attack once again emphasized Iran's ruling extremist fear of the NCRI and its affiliate organization, the Mujahedin-e Khalq. In turn, the number of international dignitaries attending this event confirms the global respect held by both organizations. For decades, the Iranian government has avoided judicial accountability as the #1 state sponsor of international terrorism. This has ended today. Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei, and President Rouhani were desperate. Citizens within Iran commenced in December 2017 the riots, and are still ongoing inside the country. Still, Khamenei's two biggest threats to power continue to be the Paris-based NCRI and the MEK in Albania. Whenever the Ayatollah's power is threatened by internal overthrow, the regime resorts to two measures. The first is brutal oppression of the Iranian citizens inside the country, including imprisonment and mass execution. The second is committing a terrorist attack against Iran's perceived enemies. Attacking the rally in Paris was a bold plan. What Khamenei, Rouhani, and Assadi failed to take into account was European law enforcement efficiency. The detection of the explosive device by Belgian police immediately activated the criminal justice agencies throughout the continent. German police apprehended Assadi during his automobile flight as he was approaching the Austrian border. We should give special recognition to the law enforcement agencies, the front line against terrorism in Europe. Now the day of justice has come for Assadi and his three accomplices. The verdicts are terrorism and attempted murder. Also indirectly on trial was Khamenei and Rouhani for ordering the failed mass slaughter. This verdict is a blow to their influence inside and outside Iran. Unfortunately, their day of justice will have to be delayed until the eventual but certain collapse of the Iranian government. The question becomes why national governments around the world currently in power still have so much reluctance to stop coddling the government of Iran and recognize the way to move forward is to work with the opposition. Neither the NCRI, the MEK, are about power in Iran. They're about democracy in Iran. Both have become cultural, political, and ideological threats to Islamic fundamentalists. The founding philosophies were both organizations: equality between those in power and those not, between men and women, and among the various religions and races. Clergy should not have total control over interpretation of the Quran, and clerics should not have total control over their congregations. These philosophies are in direct contradiction to the teachings of the Iranian fundamentalists. Shamefully, Western detractors who still strive for Iranian appeasement claim these philosophies reflect the teachings of Marx and Lenin. The reality is those philosophies accurately reflect John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. The people of Iran want change. Rather than to continue attempt appeasement with a dysfunctional governments, leaders of the international community will better serve their nations and global peace by working with the two organizations determined to bring democracy and stability to Iran and the Middle East. Those two organizations are the NCRI and the MEK. To my brothers and sisters at Ashraf 3, when you're ready to go to Iran, I'm ready to go with you. We were together at Ashraf. Let's go together into Tehran. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colonel, for your remarks. During your time in Ashraf, you have seen the regime and its terrorist activities, and today is a very important day since you are a civil party, and especially when the court has confirmed the state terrorism of the regime. And I'm sure
Thank you,
that
Mrs.
it is
Rajavi.
a very big victory, not only for the Iranian resistance, also for you and for all friends of this resistance. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Now we'll go back to Spain, to former European Parliament Vice President, Professor Alejo Vidal Quadras.
Hello, good morning to you all. dear Mrs. Rajavi, dear distinguished friends, the other day when I was in a conference call with Giulio Terzi and Stuart Stevenson, Paulo Casaca, and also our good friend Elare from dear Mrs. Rajavi, we agree that there is no stronger way to create friendship, true friendship, without suffering together. Paulo Casaca and also we have suffered together for many years. That's why we have become so close friends. But today, stronger way to experience something different. Today, we are happy together. We have suffered. We have experienced joy. Because it's a day to congratulate Rajavi and all friends from Iran, which are online now, and also our friends in Ashraf 3, and of course the courageous resistance unit inside Iran. Rajavi's great victory, friends, deserves a celebration today, because also freedom lovers of the world and Democrats of the world must celebrate this great victory we have had today. Justice has prevailed. A celebration today. 3 years ago, this brutal regime using one of its active diplomats to target the leaders of the resistance and create a tragedy among the supporters of a viable alternative for democracy. And today, this foiled crime has been reversed and has turned against its perpetrators. After more than 4 decades, they have led the most heinous terrorism across the world, from Iraq to Lebanon, from Saudi Arabia to Iraq. They have in Europe and in the United States, they have always they have always managed to escape accountability. Within the regime. The truth is, as it has been proven in the sentence, that Assadollah Assadi was officially instructed, directed, and sanctioned by the regime authorities at the highest level. The truth President Rouhani, as it has Supreme Leader Khamenei, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Intelligence of Iran are as responsible of this foiled crime as Assadi himself at the highest level. I also want President Rouhani, I also want to pose and outside Iran, then why did the regime take such a heavy risk to harm them? Isn't this verdict and the current humiliating position of the regime in this foiled terrorist plot the best reason to prove that the NCRI is the genuine and most popular alternative amongst the people inside the country, the movement that is capable of overthrowing this regime. And this is exactly why it is in so much fear that it is prepared to take any possible risk just to destroy this movement. This verdict is not just judicial. It is of historical significance. It brings the European policymakers to face the fact that they have made a great mistake so far in their policy vis-à-vis the Iranian regime. Neither the JCPOA nor any other agreement with this regime on any matter reliable. The matter of fact, so far, such a crime has no place in the international community. So I take this opportunity to mention the President of the Council, Charles Michel, that the European Union policy on Iran needs a serious review and a fundamental change. The European External Action Service has taken a path in dealing with the Iranian regime in danger Europe's credibility. Once again, I take the opportunity to congratulate you, Mrs. Rajavi, and thank the providence that has preserved your previous. I have no doubt that this verdict will be a turning point in the European policy, and the mullah's regime will pay a high price for the carnage in the Philippine gathering. This is indeed an occasion for inside Iran and for all Iranian people to celebrate. So, happy celebration. And we are always with you, fighting hand in hand. Iran is a democracy until Iran is free. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks and your support, Mr. Vidal. You are one of the pioneers in this path and one of the first friends and supporters of Ashraf residents. All the members of the Iranian resistance have a special respect for you, and we have gone through a long path, and we will continue this path until the victory and freedom of the Iranian people and the overthrow of the mullah's regime. As you said, the policy of Europe must change after this historic day, and your support for the international campaign against mullah's terrorism is very important, and we will continue. Thank you again, and thank you very much.
Joining us now is the Yemeni ambassador to France and former foreign minister of Yemen. Please welcome Dr. Riyad Yassin.
Good morning for everybody. First, I would like to congratulate President Maryam Rajavi and Iranian people for this victory. This is a historical day, which I would like to congratulate also myself, because I have been a victim of this terrorist act, if it's thanks good happened. And of course, this terrorism, which is the behavior, continuous behavior of the Iranian regime since long time, as they are supporting and funding the Houthis militia, which they call themselves Ansarullah in my country, where they destroyed my country in the last 6-year wars. And the actions are, all of them are terrorist acts, what they are doing to my people in Yemen. And the last decision by the American government to label them as a terrorist should be supported by everybody, and should be supported by everyone, because what they are doing in my country is no different what the Iranian regime doing in Iran and outside Iran. They are working, the Houthis militia or Ansarullah, they are an agents for a terrorist regime, which I think we should all come together and work together in order to stop them and to stop their unwanted terrorism, which of course a lot of innocent people are dying and suffering from this kind of behaviors. Today we are celebrating, and we would continue our struggle, our fight against terrorism. And I think the decision today by the court, the verdict, is worth to celebrate and to remember this day. And thank you very much for all your support. And we hope that coming together, we can become victorious always against such behaviors. Thank you very much.
Civil party in this case, and you know very well that the Iranian regime is the source of terrorism in the Middle East, especially in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and also in Yemen. And we are all at the same front against the religious dictatorship ruling Iran. That's the enemy of all people of the region. Once again, thank you very much for your presence and for your activity.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to France. Our next speaker is a true friend of the Iranian people in their efforts towards freedom. Let's hear from member of the French Parliament, Monsieur Jean-Michel Clément.
Madame la Présidente,
dear Mrs. President, dear ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, I wanted to greet and hail your commitment in this struggle, this constant struggle for democracy and freedom. As you know, how we are paying attention to such values and such campaign. Being able to be next to you today is ordinary, but is crucial so that the voice of freedom can be heard. I want to say first that I am glad, I rejoice about the sentence which was issued today. It's decisive on different levels. Firstly, it's marking the independence between the judicial powers and the diplomacy, so that today the right and law is victorious, and this was important. What could we have said if the attack had taken place, if there had been fatalities as a result of this attack? We would not be able to understand that the judicial decision wasn't strong enough if there was no victims. For me, the act that was committed is at the same level. The intent was what mattered, and this was what sanctioned as much as the act that didn't happen. And it was essential that justice was served and that diplomacy was put out of this situation. So I would like to pay tribute to the freedom and the independence of the Belgian justice in this case. I would like to pay tribute also to those who have supported this decision, and you are all one amongst them. Anybody attending this meeting today, and yourself at first, the President, it's not the end of a fight. I believe it's the first page of a new book which should be opened today. With this decision, it's a strong signal which is sent to the all European diplomacy, and also in particular to the French diplomacy, I hope. I believe that this will remain in history, and the decisions which were issued were quite severe, but were proportional to the acts that they were wanted to carry out. And we have understood it is a criminal system and not a political system. I believe it's important to note that tomorrow we try to link the two together with different diplomatic pressures, but which were ignored by those who managed to take this to the end of the process. This decision is a way to justify your fight and the need that it has to be pursued, and the significance that all the countries who care about democracy, about freedom, can seize this and make sure that this regime comes to an end. So it's more than a friendly greetings to the Iranian people. I acknowledge all your action, and I would like to accompany you further along with my colleagues who are part of this committee. And I believe so, and I'm their spokesman today for those who couldn't speak today. To carry on the fight, it's a revolutionary slogan I used to say when I was a student, and somehow it's my youth which is coming back to me with the fact that you are pursuing. Thank you very much and good luck. Thank you very much, Mr. Clément, for your support. It's an historic day, and your speech and your attendance today are witnesses that the French MPs are committed against terrorism and in Europe, especially in France. And as you said, it's a victory for justice, and our fight will continue. As you said, the outcome within the judicial system, an independent judicial system, is playing in favor of the Iranian resistance, like today. I also hope that one day there will be a free Iran after the Mullah, that the Iranian people will be able to have a democratic and independent judicial system in favor, supporting the Iranian people. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And now we are going to Canada to hear from a distinguished friend of the NCRI and the Iranian resistance. It is with utmost pleasure that I present to you the former Prime Minister of Canada. Please welcome the Honorable Stephen Harper.
Merci beaucoup, and greetings to all my friends at the National Council of Resistance of Iran and to your entire global network. In 2018, I attended the NCRI's Free Iran rally for the first time. It was in Paris, and it was one of the largest and most impressive events I've ever participated in. We did not know then that Iranian government agents were planning to disrupt that event through terrorism and murder. Those individuals have been put on trial, where they have faced undeniable evidence of their intent to commit those crimes. We did not know that then, but we would not have been surprised. This is what the Islamic Republic in Tehran, the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, does. And it is no surprise that such actions would be directed against you, the NCRI, which is the regime's largest opposition, and which works relentlessly to expose its malevolence, its brutality, and its crimes. Whatever the outcome in the court today, I'm here to say, continue your work. Continue the fight for freedom, democracy, human dignity, and peaceful change in Iran. Continue to strike fear into the hearts of the extremist mullahs in Tehran. And continue that fight until victory is achieved. Your friends around the world are with you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you for your support for the Iranian people and resistance and the members of resistance in Ashraf. It was an honor for all the residents to meet you at 2019 in Ashraf 3. The result of today's verdict will certainly have an impact on the relation of all Western governments and the mullahs regime. Now, there is no doubt about the reality and the crimes of the mullahs regime. This regime must be expelled from the international community. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present to you a former national security advisor to the US president, whose friendship with the Iranian resistance has drawn the ire of the mullahs in Tehran. Please give a warm welcome to General James Jones.
Good day to all of our friends in Albania and around the world, to all the people who are seeking the same thing we are, and that is the freedom for the people of Iran and the opportunity to live in a democratic society, one that is admirably envisioned by the leader of the NCRI, Mrs. Maryam Rajavi. My name is Jim Jones. I'm a retired general officer in the United States Marine Corps and a former national security advisor to the President of the United States. I'm honored to be with you to talk a little bit about the Iranian regime's state terrorism and to suggest that it is time to adopt a much more firm international policy with regard to the regime. Nowhere is this more well represented than in the trial of Assadollah Assadi and 3 of his accomplices, which were held in Belgium, Antwerp, Belgium, on the 27th of November and the 3rd of December. Mr. Assadi, the regime diplomat, of course, refused to attend the court. They were charged with attempting to blow up the Free Iran gathering at Villepinte, a suburb of Paris, on 30 June 2018, and all 4 were charged with several counts of terrorism. The court will announce its decision on Thursday, 4 February 2021 at 9 a.m., just about the time you might be seeing this message. The prosecutors have asked for lengthy sentences in all the cases, ranging from 20 years to 18 and 15 years, revocation of Belgian citizenships in the cases of Mr. Naami, Mr. Saadouni, and Mr. Arefani, and a 20-year sentence for Mr. Assadollah Assadi, which is the maximum sentence because no one was killed. The defense of Mr. Assadi was ridiculous. His lawyers didn't address the facts of the case at all. Instead, he continued to claim diplomatic immunity without any legal recourse, of course. and that's because of his status as a diplomat. He also claimed that the explosives were in really nothing more than firecrackers designed to make loud noises, and as such, no one was lethally exposed to danger. The real decision makers, of course, as we know, was taken by the Supreme National Security Council, headed by the regime's president, Hassan Rouhani, and then confirmed by Supreme Leader Khamenei, and then assigned to the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, the MOIS, to implement the decision in close cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And as we all know, the target was the NCRI's annual meeting, where hundreds of international dignitaries and tens of thousands of participants were present. And the prime target, of course, was the NCRI president-elect, Mrs. Maryam Rajavi. Had the plot been successful, it would have led to a carnage with hundreds of casualties. Investigations concluded that Assadi was a senior official at the MOIS, and his diplomatic status provided him with a cover for his unlawful actions, including terrorist activities. The 2-year investigation has concluded that the terrorist act was not the personal initiative of Assadi, but more importantly, an act of state-sponsored terrorism. The State Security Agency of Belgium also informed the judicial investigation that this was a case of state terrorism and that the MOIS was involved. Assadi brought the bomb to Europe from Iran via a commercial flight and then personally delivered it to the 2 bombers. The instruction of the bomb was found in his car. The investigation also revealed that Assadi had been running a network of agents in Europe, some of whom are still not identified. Receipts for the monthly payments to some of his agents were in Assadi's car when he was arrested. Huge amounts of money were paid to these agents. The 3 agents had received at least 450,000 euros in the past several years, but this was certainly not all the money they received. So why did the regime engage in such an act of terrorism in a city like Paris? They took the risk because it was vital for it to strike at the NCRI and MEK as the existential threat to the survival of the regime and as a popular democratic alternative. It ordered Assadi to personally get involved because it wanted this plot to be foolproof and absolutely successful. It did not trust intermediaries or any lower level official. As we all know, over the past few years within Iran, there's been a new surge of support for the NCRI and MEK movements, especially among the younger generation. Internationally, not only was the MEK removed from the terrorist list, but also, more important, it was being recognized as a democratic force for change in Iran. The attack demonstrated that the regime's desperate situation forced it to take such a tremendous risk and to order its diplomat to personally get engaged in acts of terrorism in the heart of Europe. So what's the importance of this case? The Iranian regime has been engaged in acts of terrorism for over 40 years, but this is the first time a diplomat has been caught red-handed. The evidence is overwhelming about the role of the Iranian regime's most senior leadership in this plot. And the case put to an end the false narrative that these acts of terrorism were the work of the hardliners or rogue elements within the regime and not officially sanctioned by regime authorities. It is clear that the entire regime, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Javad Zarif, was involved. So what should we do next? The judicial process is over. The proof of the Iranian regime's involvement in state terrorism is undeniable. And it's now time to end our conciliatory approach, wherever it exists, towards this regime and adopt a much firmer policy. Only then will the people of Iran be inspired to rise up and replace the regime, one way or another, and only then will the regime know that it is truly in its last, taking its last breath. First, European governments and the US must strongly condemn the regime for this act of terrorism. We can no longer have business as usual, and we can no longer sustain ourselves on the false hopes that the regime will in fact change. Second, we should downgrade diplomatic relations, withdraw ambassadors from Iran, close the regime's embassies and all other regime centers, predicate a return to normal relations on the dismantling of the regime's terrorist apparatus and its assurances to not engage in terrorism again. And that should be accompanied by substantial proof. Third, hold Minister Zarif accountable for his responsibility and that of his ministry in acts of terrorism in Europe, and therefore refrain from ever inviting him to Europe or to holding talks with him. Anything less than these necessary measures will be construed by the regime as a sign of weakness on the part of the international community and will embolden it to continue its rogue behavior with impunity. The evidence that they would do that is overwhelming. Fourth, we should designate the MOIS and the IRGC as terrorist entities in Europe and withdraw the refugee status or citizenship for regime's agents in Europe and deport them or arrest them. Fifth, reject the regime's blackmail policy. Giving in to regime blackmail is a recipe for more terrorism. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, and my friends, and perhaps more importantly, we should stand with the Iranian people in their desire for regime change by supporting the democratic alternative of the National Council of Resistance of Iran and its president-elect, Mrs. Maryam Rajavi. The time has come for decisive action that will convince the regime that its days are numbered, if not already over. And it will give great courage and high morale to the people of Iran that someday soon, in the very near future, they will walk in the sunlight of freedom and democracy and enjoy the trappings of life in ways that they have been denied for over 40 years. It is time to take decisive action. It is time to not nurture our policies on the false hopes that the regime will ever change. It must be replaced, it must depart, and it must give way to the undeniable quest for freedom and democracy that lies in the heart of all true Iranians. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Jones. As you said, this case was against state terrorism of the mullahs. You have served in several administrations, and because of your commitment to moral principles, you have always defended the Iranian resistance and the MEK to establish freedom and democracy in Iran. You have always condemned suppression and suffering of the people of Iran. As usual, you are at the front line of the campaign against mullahs' terrorism. The mullahs consider your support as a blow to their regime. And you know that the regime is very fearful of you for your instance and for your supporting the Iranian resistance. I appreciate you for your support and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I would now like to invite a prominent and renowned musician, composer, and conductor who is a member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. I am honored to present to you Maestro محمد شمس. همکنون دعوت میکنم از استاد محمد شمس، هنرمند برجسته عضو شورای ملی مقاومت ایران، آهنگساز و رهبر ارکستر. خواهش میکنم آقای شمس.
از آقای شمس که بیش از 40 ساله برای این مقاومت در هر شرایطی می نوازه، سالیان سال همراه با بابا برادرمون سیدی کاشانی و در همه شرایط برای شرایط جنگ، برای رزمندگان و مجاهدان آزادی، برای شرایط تلخ و
Mr. Shams for the past 40 years has been playing music for the resistance and for the resistance fighters. And especially those who lost their lives. Now, this victory is ours, and we have come to a very good results. And your beautiful piece of music, which is for this resistances festival. Thank you very much for Mr. Shams.
I'm now honored to invite a former member of the Foreign
من مایلم که
Parliament of Norway and a great friend who was essential in the Ashrafi's
مایلم عضو سابق پارلمان نروژ رو به شما معرفی کنیم. آقای لارش ریسه.
Mrs. Rajavi, excellent
خانم رجوی،
friends in Ashraf, ladies
دوستان و آقایان در اشرف، خانم ها و آقایان،
This is a historic day,
این یک روز تاریخیه،
not only for the opposition,
نه فقط برای اپوزیسیون بلکه برای تمام دنیا که میخواهند یک ایران آزاد رو ببینند. واقعیت رژیم ایران این هستش که امروز در دانشگاه در بروکسل دیده شد، به خاطر اینکه مدارک غیرقابل انکار وجود داشت و جواد ظریف خودش آرشیتکت و طراح این بود. این طرح توسط حسن روحانی و همچنین با تأیید خامنه‌ای انجام شده بود. اگر آنها موفق شده بود،
How come that every European leader wants to shake hands now with Javad Zarif? He seems to pop up next to a prime minister or foreign minister from various Western countries in every news page we see. After receiving the verdict today from the court in Brussels, all European leaders planning to meet with Javad Zarif should be clear about one thing on their to-do list. I have to get issued an arrest order for Javad Zarif. He has committed crimes against humanity and should be sent to The Hague, where he should be held responsible for working out and giving instructions to execute this evil plan. How is it possible to work with the regime for anybody as if nothing happened? I was present at the event on the 30th of June 2018 together with my wife and my two daughters. I was completely unaware of the drama which took place as the two terrorists were arrested on their way towards the conference hall to kill all of us, the speakers, the guests, and the leadership of the MEK and NCRI, including Mrs. Maryam Rajavi. We have learned through the court case that the capacity of the bomb sent through the border in diplomatic luggage was enough to kill several hundreds of people. Those who planned this big explosion must have been aware of how risky it would be to try to execute the operation on European soil, knowing very well that the agents of the regime are being monitored and followed constantly by several intelligence services. In a way, the willingness to go forward with the plans, in spite of the high risk, shows that the regime is desperate. The situation is desperate in Iran. The Iranian regime has committed terrorist acts for more than 40 years. They have used reverse psychology methods all these years and naming the opposition as the terrorists while they were actually the guilty ones themselves. But this is the first time a diplomat has been caught in the act. It is interesting that the evidence presented in the court was so overwhelming that the lawyers of the regime did not even try to oppose the validity of the tapes, transcripts, photos, and footage. I'm honored that I'm in a few minutes will take part in the annual National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. this year through Zoom. And President Biden will take part for the first time, the president, and also there will be greetings and prayers from former presidents of the United States. And the prayer is now for unity and coming together and stand firm together. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to, for the leaders in Europe to hold the regime legally responsible for the crimes they have committed. And for those governments who are hesitant to actually get Javad Zarif arrested and sent to The Hague, what about doing something? Close the embassies, deny him coming, don't invite him, don't have meetings with him. It's time to stand together, stand up for democracy and human rights in Iran, and hope for the day for the freedom to come very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Lars Risse. Thank you for your support and your efforts. As you said, today is a historic day and is a victory for all freedom lovers in the world. You are one of the pioneers in this field, and as you said, the leaders of this regime must be prosecuted for crimes against humanity, and we'll continue our struggle until the end to establish freedom and democracy in Iran. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to call on a name and a face known to the Ashrafis for courage and decency. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome legal expert and former chief of the Human Rights Office of UNAMI, Dr. Taher Boumedra.
Mrs. Rajavi, my friends in Ashraf 3, my friends in Iran, and indeed all over the world. Today, the truth, the rule of law, justice has prevailed over impunity. Indeed, impunity has failed. And through this verdict, it's not only Assadollah Assadi who has been convicted, it's the whole regime. The Iranian regime as a whole has been proven before a court of law, being behind the crimes of assassinations and crimes that amount to crimes against humanity. So I take this opportunity to join my voice to the previous speakers to call on the EU and its member states to start a new type of relationship with this regime. A new relationship that would leave no room for complaisance. A new relationship that would hold all criminals accountable for their acts. And I think today's verdict is a very good example and a source of inspiration for the United Nations human rights system. Let's keep in mind that the 1988 massacre of the political prisoners is still to be accounted for. And I'm sure, again, regarding this issue of 1988 massacre, justice will prevail again. Mubarak, Mubarak, Mubarak to all of you in Iran, in Ashraf 3, and to you, Mrs. Rajavi. Thank you.
Presence and your speech. You truly said today is the victory of justice, and this verdict was against the entirety of the regime. You are the first one who exposed the mass killing and genocide in Ashraf and Liberty. You were the one who exposed all the crimes and wrong doing by that Kubler as a special representative of the Secretary General. And recent years, you have been very active in international scene for exposing the massacre of 30,000 political prisoners. And now, as a witness civil party in exposing the Iranian regime terrorism. As a close friend of Ashrafis, I salute you and your courage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Boumedra. It's an honor to introduce our next speaker, the former Minister of Foreign Trade and Minister of Transport and Communications of Finland, the Honorable Kimmo Sasi.
Maryam Rajavi, dear rights defenders. As we all know now, so the court in Antwerp, Belgium, has given its verdict. And now it's proven that Iranian regime's diplomat, Assadollah Assadi, and his 3 paid terrorists tried to murder thousands of people in the opposition gathering in Paris, 2018. And I was one of those attending in that meeting as international supporter for democracy and peace and human rights in Iran and supporting Mrs. Rajavi's movement. It has now been proven that there has been an action of terrorism and state terrorism. We have now a diplomat who has brought bombing material from Iran to the European Union soil. And I must say, this is a great shame for the Iranian government. And it means that now there has been a target that is peace-loving human rights people in the Iranian opposition that should be defended by all international organizations. And therefore, I, as former Minister for European Affairs in Finland, urge the European Union foreign ministers in their next meeting first to condemn the Iran regime's terrorist action in this case. Second, go through all the embassies in the European Union countries and guarantee that there is no person that could take action in terrorist sense. Then the foreign ministers must list all Iranian regime organizations that are responsible of this act of terrorism in Europe, and especially they have to study the role of Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in this case, and it would be important to put that organization on the terrorist list in the European Union. And then all those persons have been attending this action, so the European Union should levy personal sanctions on them that they really feel the pain of what they have done against human rights. I think now the European Union, and especially the foreign ministers of the European Union, have to show how serious they are in fighting for human rights and protecting the most important human right, that is the right to life. Now, this must be the starting point to the final fight for democracy and human rights, according to Mrs. Rajavi's 10-point plan to get peace, and human rights in Iran. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kimo Sasi. We have with us right now someone who's a torchbearer of the European Parliament's support for Iranian democracy. Please welcome the former member of the European Parliament, the Honorable Paolo Casaca.
Dear Madam President, dear friends in Ashraf, all the Iranian community, all friends of freedom, many congratulations. The judicial authorities in Antwerp made history. After 41 years, a European court has finally condemned the Islamic Republic of Iran for terrorism. It was certainly a long time, a far too long time, during which the theocracy not only enjoyed impunity, but also, and much worse, managed to lead Western institutions to persecute the victims of terror activities as if they were culprits. It is a moment for every freedom and peace-loving person to celebrate. It is also a moment to strengthen our efforts and seek justice for the countless victims of the Mullah regime. Zarif, the head of the Iranian Foreign Affairs and hierarchic superior of the convicted terrorists, recognized his own responsibilities when he acknowledged that the terrorists acted within the framework of his own diplomatic instructions. After this decision by the Antwerp court, the claim of diplomatic immunity was transformed into an unequivocal confession of terrorism masterminding. How can the European diplomacy pretend it is facing anything else than the representative of a terrorist state? How can the European diplomacy insist on a deal with a clerical gang which has repeatedly shown it respects no international convention and is ready to commit murder on European soil? According to the Vienna Conventions, diplomatic status cannot be used for terrorist activities. Therefore, European institutions must reevaluate all credentials accepted from representatives of the theocracy, limiting their capacity to further sponsor extremism and violence in Europe. It is high time for European leaders to acknowledge they are facing a state that utterly disregards human rights and legal international obligations. It is time to demand full investigations and persecutions of those high in the clerical state's hierarchy responsible for crimes against humanity. It is time to fully support the plight by the Iranian people to live in peace, freedom, and democracy in a state respecting the rules of human dignity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Casaca. In this part of the program, I am honored to present to you a prominent musician and member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, Mr. Hamidreza Taherzadeh, who's going to perform for us. در این قسمت از برنامه مایلم با خوشوقتی بسیار دعوت کنم از آقای حمیدرضا طاهرزاده، استاد نوازنده تار و هنرمند برجسته عضو شورای ملی مقاومت ایران. ما منتظر هنرنمایی شما هستیم. بفرمایید، خواهش میکنم. Thank you very much for that great performance. We are very pleased to have with us now a great defender of the PMOI and Ashrafis, an honorable jurist and professor of international law. Please help me welcome Professor Eric David.
Thank you to give me the floor, or I should say the screen, to speak about this day, which is in fact, as far as I'm concerned, a very great day for the law. I can immediately assure everybody that I'll not be long because I associate myself to everything that has been said till now. So I have no problem to be as short as possible, but I would like to pay tribute first of all to my own country. It's not very rare, it's not very current that I do that in general, but For once, I'll do that because it's thanks to our police that we succeed in arresting these terrorists. And I am also proud to pay tribute to the justice of my country. And no, I'm sorry, but as I'm against British linguistic imperialism, I'll go on in French. Et donc, ce que je voudrais dire également, c'est que malgré tout,
So what I would like to also add is that despite it all, I think that on a legal basis, there were no real problems as such, because finally I feel that I do not know the case in the finite details, but I have the feeling that the people who had been arrested, who pretended to be diplomats, could benefit from Article 40 of the Vienna Convention on the diplomatic relations. I stated that today was a great day for law, because not only there is this conviction for terrorism for these people, but it is also, and this is a coincidence, it is today that the International Court has also, International Penal Court has also condemned a member of the Resistance Army of the Lord in Uganda, Mr. Dominic Ongwen, for war crimes and crimes against humanity, which enables me to say that in the end the law always prevails. I'm reading at the moment with finishing a book on the Nuremberg process, trial rather, and I can say that finally we can note that the law always triumphs and prevails in the end. And I would like for the mullahs and the Iranian leaders to realize that, and especially for them to beware of not making decisions that will be definitive and without recourse against Professor Jalali, to whom we have already made reference earlier on. So on this basis and on the basis that I keep on believing in the law, and the Iranian leaders should believe in the law also, and therefore this is how I finish my intervention and what I wanted to say to you today. Many thanks.
Thank you, Professor David. Now we're going back to France to hear from the former French Minister of Defense and France's representative to the European Parliament. Please welcome our honorable friend, Madame Michelle Alliot-Marie.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je voudrais vous saluer et saluer.
Hello everybody, I would like to salute you and also to especially salute Madame Maryam Rajavi by thanking her for welcoming me to take part in this debate. I wanted to state that for many years now we have known each other and I admire her. I sincerely admire her courage, first of all, as well as her determination and resilience, and her faultless commitment without any hesitation to serve the values that we all share, which is what gets us close and make us close, which are the values of democracy, individual freedom, values such as respect for women's rights, the value of laicity too, of secularism too. And I think that here all of us are really liking, and we really welcome peace as the most fragile assets, our most precious asset. And I've underlined that many times, how we are living in a dangerous world, in a world where conflicts are multiplying across borders, where there are increasing tensions, where some countries have a lot and more weapons than necessary, and there are some terrorist actions that can now strike anywhere and touch everybody. And on top of this, for over a year, almost a year now, we have to deal with the COVID pandemic, which also threatens each one of us, which is also another element that can destabilize our planet, and yet we do not know how long this will last for, and it's quite probable that by dealing with this, the world will uncover that there will also be future pandemics, and I think that therefore in these troubled times, the most important thing is maybe to try to contribute to peace situations and to guarantee that we have some zones and areas which are areas and zones of stability in the world. And from that point of view, Iran could be an important factor, and I would say even an essential factor for stabilization of the Middle East region. And it could also contribute to peace, because Iran is a country with a long history, with a very rich culture, and with a geographic position which can enable it to act also with men and women who are highly educated, with some researchers, some university professors, engineers of the highest caliber. So this is really within Iran's vocation, traditional vocation for Iran to be an element of stability. Unfortunately, when we look at what has been happening for the last few years, we remark that due to the attitude of the Iranian government, Iran, on the contrary, is a factor of tension and instability. We can see with the nuclear problem, I have spoken about this quite often, we see the risk in nuclear dissemination, which represents a risk for the whole of the planet. Iran seems to have understood this with some international agreements, and now what we notice is that what we observe is that the government almost with wanting to obtain this or that is violating the agreements in international conventions by once again launching a program deemed to enrich uranium with the threat of a nuclear weapon, and they do this by blackmail. This is extremely dangerous, and I say that it is, and we must fight against this, because technically Iran can quite probably get a nuclear weapon. And then what will happen politically? Other countries around Iran, because they will feel threatened and fearful, will also get a nuclear weapons, and this will lead to an increased destabilization for the whole of the world. So as we can see with this pandemic, we have many other things that we need to take care of. And there is also the terrorism problem. We have stated for many years that the Iranian government supports a number of terrorist groups, especially in the Middle East region. And today, with the trial taking place in Belgium, in Antwerp, we have gone further. We can see amongst the accused somebody who is a member of the Iranian embassy in Austria. That person is in the dock, he's an advisor, and with him, the accomplices represent symbolically the Iranian state itself, which is in the dock for a terrorist act that almost succeeded, which could have led to many victims in Villepinte in Paris 3 years ago from now, a little bit less than 3 years ago. And it is thanks to an exemplary cooperation between the Belgian, German, and French intelligence agencies and services that we managed to avoid a complete catastrophe, which would have led to many casualties. So I say that this is enough. The international relations cannot be led that way. International relations cannot be based on blackmail, cannot be based on terrorism. Let's be clear. It's not up to foreign countries to meddle in Iranian affairs. It's up to the Iranian people themselves to decide who they want to lead the country. But I think that in these times when we can see that COVID should mobilize all of the forces, all of the goodwills, all of the skills and competencies, it is high time for us to stop, for these terrorist actions to stop. It is time to change all this. This is what the world expects. We owe this to our children. We owe this to our leaders and to our responsibilities.
Merci beaucoup. Joining our conference right now is a representative of the great people of Italy in the European Parliament and a great friend of Iranian people and women. Please give a big welcome to the Honorable Jana Gancha.
Cara signora Rajavi, cari amici, cari colleghi, oggi è un
Dear
giorno
Mrs. Rajavi, dear friends, dear colleagues, today it's a really important day for us in Europe because our values, the Europe we had imagined, a democratic Europe, a prosperous Europe, a safe Europe, we are defending these values today. But I think it's an important day also for the Iranian people and for the Iranian resistance, because it could be the beginning of the end of the impunity of the Iranian regime. As a member of the European Parliament, I'm asking the Vice President of the Commission, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs, what kind of behavior diplomacy will adopt. We need a firmer policy against the threatening activities of the Iranian regime in Europe. We need to react at European level. We need to be firmer against the actions of this regime. So in a joint letter with other 7 colleagues from the European Parliament, my colleagues belong to different political groups and to different countries. We have expressed our concern, and we have written in this letter that the time has come to downgrade diplomatic relations with Iran. Maybe we should withdraw our ambassadors from Iran. We should send a strong signal unless the Iranian government guarantees to put an end to all terrorist activities in Europe. Our final objective, as we all know, is achieve a situation as soon as possible, to create a situation where the massacres that we have seen elsewhere in the world will stop. I was there in 2018, and today I'm here because this verdict is very important. We have to carry on working, and I would like to congratulate you and thank you for all your efforts and the huge amount of work you have done. I'm sure this today will be a source of inspiration for the Iranian people who are watching us. I will be at your side, and I will continue to be at your side until the day that Iran will be free and when democracy will triumph, and that day the world will be a safer place for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those wonderful remarks. Our next honorable speaker joins us from Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the former Foreign Minister of Canada, the Honorable John Bird.
For more than 40 years now, the Iranian regime in Tehran has been supporting state-sponsored terrorism right around the world. They focused on the Middle East, they focused on the regime's enemies, and they focused on innocent civilians. Another big example of this happened on June the 30th, 2018, when the National Council of Resistance of Iran was having their annual gathering outside of Paris, France. Tens and tens and tens of thousands of people attended to call for regime change, to support the NCRI, and to lend their support to the group's leader, Maryam Rajavi. After the event, it was discovered when an Iranian regime diplomat was arrested in Belgium that the Iranian regime, including Hassan Rouhani, the president of the regime, were targeting the gathering, targeting the NCRI, targeting civilians, and most importantly, targeting Maryam Rajavi. Their goal was simple: to cause as much death and casualties by terrorist means through financing and through direct support. The The most disturbing part of this is that an Iranian regime, an accredited diplomat representing the regime with a diplomatic passport, has been charged with the attack, the attempted attack. The evidence collected by the Belgian authorities put on a trial last November and December is strong, it's clear, it's undeniable. And we will soon learn whether the accused terrorist and his 3 co-conspirators will be convicted. We believe that the evidence is undeniable, and we hope that there'll be justice for the NCRI, justice for Maryam Rajavi, and justice for everyone who was at that event. What makes this personal for me is I was there with supporters of people wanting to overthrow the regime. I was there to speak out against state-sponsored terrorism, to speak out against the atrocities and terrible human rights abuses that have escalated under Rouhani, and to speak out against the terrible human rights record on the ground in all regions of Iran. So for me, it's personal. And let's hope that we get justice today for the attempted terrorist attack, that we get justice today for the attempted murder of what would have been hundreds, if not thousands, or even tens of thousands of people. And let's recommit ourselves to work with all aspects of Iranian society, whether it be student groups, unions, other opposition groups, the NCRI, that we stand up against this regime, and that a better day comes for the Iranian people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bird. Now we're going to US. We now have the pleasure to hear from a dear friend of the Iranian people and resistance, the former White House Director of Public Liaison and US expert to the UN Subcommission on Human Rights. Please help me welcome the Honorable Linda Chavez.
Hello, I'm Linda Chavez. I am sorry I can't be with you in person, but I am happy to join you via video conference and to talk about what occurred in June of 2018 in the suburbs of Paris, where I, along with dozens of other high-profile Americans, many of whom had served prominently in roles in both Democratic and Republican administrations, were gathered in support of Madam Maryam Rajavi and the National Council of Resistance of Iran. We were there to hear Madam Rajavi talk about her 10-point plan, to talk about the freedoms that she is seeking for the people of Iran. And we learned shortly after we left Villepinte that in fact we were very lucky to have escaped Villepinte with our lives. There was an effort on the part of the Iranian regime not just to quash dissent by offering words of criticism, but by sending bombs and using their diplomats in Europe to in fact involve themselves in the plot and to hire those who would take those weapons and bring them to the gathering outside Paris in order to seek maximum damage. Their goal, obviously, was to assassinate Madam Rajavi, who the Iranian regime views as the major threat to the regime. But they also would have inflicted mass casualties with scores of people possibly having been killed or at the very least injured. So I am here to ask the European Union to recognize the danger of the Iranian regime, to recognize that diplomats who are stationed throughout Europe often are simply the security arm of the Iranian regimes. They are not true diplomats. They are not coming in seeking peace or seeking dialogue. They are coming to spread terror. And in fact, that is exactly what happened, and that is the case before the courts. And I would hope that as a result of this case, as a result of the evidence that was overwhelming, that showed the Iranian regime was interested in assassinating people within Europe, that European Union's countries will seek not to have normal relations with the Iranian regime as long as their purpose is to engage in this kind of state-sponsored terrorism. So I come to you as an individual and as someone who has served at a high level in the Reagan administration to urge the countries of the European Union to take seriously this threat, where dissent is quashed not only within Iran for Iranian people, but that state terrorism is brought onto European soil. And I urge that in order to stop more terrorism from spreading in Europe, that the European Union will act decisively to dissolve the network of agents that hide under the cover of diplomacy within Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we're fortunate to have joining us a great man, known as the torch to his colleagues for breaking barriers, a steadfast defender of the Iranian resistance. Please welcome Senator Robert Torricelli.
My congratulations to all of those who joined with me in Paris and would have been victims of this terrorist plot on today's verdict, to all of those who have fought so hard in the MEK for Iranian freedom, and to Iranian patriots everywhere who want to restore the good name of Iran and create a free and democratic republic in Tehran. There is no mistaking that today is an extraordinary victory. These four individuals, posing as Iranian diplomats, agents of the regime, have been found in a court of law in a free, open, and fair process, guilty of acts of terrorism. Any debate about the Iranian regime's involvement in acts of terror, murder, is now over. It's established as a matter of law, a matter of fact, that it was the intention of the mullahs in Tehran to murder Mrs. Rajavi and all of us who were there doing nothing more than in free expression, in France, the heart of a Western democracy, petitioning the Iranian government to let its people live free lives. And now the verdict is in, and these four individuals will pay with years or decades of their freedom. But what's not done? They didn't act alone. Indeed, interestingly, they never even pled innocence. All they were arguing is that they shouldn't be tried because they were diplomats. They didn't claim they weren't terrorists. They didn't claim they weren't trying to commit murder. They claimed they were diplomats. Well, their pleas have been rejected. Now, where do we go? First, let's just be honest with each other. While these four individuals were guilty, they were members of the Iranian government, agents of the Ministry of Security and Intelligence. The real culprit that should be on trial, Zarif, was not there, but he remains guilty. And for all in the international community who seek justice, he and his subordinates are yet to be apprehended and tried, but they are guilty, as is the larger regime. International diplomacy, using the status of a diplomat to transport explosives, to plan murders, to move agents with the intent of killing, is as much of a violation of international law as is possible. So what do we do? First, for those nations who have not done so, designating Zarif, designating the ministry as a terrorist enterprise is essential. Sanction it, call it out for what it is, a terrorist enterprise. All Western governments, if you have confidence in your own courts, if you believe your own prosecutors, if you're willing to be honest with the evidence, what choice do we have? These are judgments my own government, the United States, have made, but now must be made by countries in the EU and Britain and a host of other nations. You have confidence in your courts, follow their lead. Second, the Iranian people. If you doubted before the claims of the United States and other Western nations that the Iranian regime is a terrorist government, is there anything left now to discuss or debate? In a free, open court, they have been found guilty of using their own agents to commit terrorism. So all of us have a role to play. My congratulations to the police of Germany, Belgium, and France, the courts of Belgium, the governments of Western Europe for their professionalism, their honesty, their integrity, and their strength. They've spoken. Now, as I've suggested, other governments need to speak by designating as terrorist acts, certainly designating Zarif as a terrorist. And then the Iranian people. You've seen the evidence. You've seen what has happened. So many brave Iranians have now taken to the streets demanding freedom for themselves and for their families. So many have sacrificed. Now it's everyone else's turn. Take a stand. Take a stand. The MEK and Mrs. Rajavi have provided the leadership and the inspiration. There's just so much they can do, and there's just so much all of us, the international community, can do. Ultimately, while today was a victory, it's not the ultimate success that we need. That will be earned only by the Iranian people on the streets of the cities and towns of Iran, demanding freedom. To everyone who was a part of today's victory, congratulations. There is justice, there is accountability for acts of terrorism in the world by the Iranian government. As someday, those who hold Iranian patriots today in jails throughout Iran, who've tortured your sons and daughters, denied your freedom, stolen billions of dollars, even while the Iranian people go hungry, deprived of the most basic needs, for the theft of your resources, for the denial of your freedom, for the abuse of your children. Just as today, there is a verdict. History and future courts, as assuredly the mullahs will one day sit in a docket, in a jury, and a trial in Tehran for their crimes. As agents of the Ministry of Interior, as Arif himself will sit in a jury docket. As sure as that will happen, today we celebrate this great victory. Congratulations again. My thanks and admirations for the police, for the judges, for the juries of Western Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Torricelli. At this point, I am honored to present to you a noble politician who's always given priority to human rights and principles. And as such, he's been a front runner in defending the rights of the people of Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Struan Stevenson.
When a Middle Eastern country orders one of its diplomats to bomb an opposition rally in Europe, prepares the lethal device, sends him to the EU on a commercial airliner with the bomb in his diplomatic bag, what should the West do? This is not some sort of Hollywood fantasy. This is reality. This really happened. Now, we've just heard the sentence passed by a Belgian court on Assadollah Assadi, the Iranian diplomat, and his 4 Iranian co-conspirators who were involved in the plot to kill and maim hundreds at a mass rally of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the NCRI, attended by tens of thousands of people at Villepinte near Paris in June 2018. I was there. Now, all 4 have received long jail terms for terrorism. I was a plaintiff at the trial, along with many other supporters of the PMOI MEK. Today's court ruling is a great victory for the NCRI and its charismatic leader, the President-elect Mrs. Maryam Rajavi. It's also a great victory for the PMOI MEK and their frontline team in Ashraf 3, The court's verdict will be of enormous significance and a huge morale booster for the courageous resistance units throughout Iran, who can now see their tyrannical mullahs regime exposed and held to account in a European Court of Justice. The clerical regime has a history of deploying its assassins in the guise of diplomats and using their embassies around the world as bomb factories. Since seizing power in the 1979 revolution, the theocratic regime, whose main contribution to the world has been Islamic fundamentalism, has ruthlessly bombed and shot its opponents round the globe, while torturing and executing political prisoners at home. But this is the first time a diplomat has been caught red-handed and jailed for acts of terror. It must surely mark a turning point in relations with the mullahs regime. There can be no return to business as usual. There can be no more arguments that diplomacy is the answer. The arch criminal and supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, together with his senior ministers like President Hassan Rouhani, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, and the Minister of Intelligence Mahmoud Alavi, ordered the spying, ordered the bomb plots, and ordered the assassinations. They must be held to account. It's time for a complete change of direction in US, EU, and UN policy towards Iran. The people of Iran expect the West to be on their side. They expect their calls for democracy to be taken seriously. Human rights and women's rights cannot be compromised or marginalized on the pretext of political considerations or trade deals, or particularly the flawed nuclear deal. The appeasement policy, lamely followed by the EU and its top diplomat Joseph Borrell, is dead in the water. It's high time the West realized that the peace they have bought with appeasement is only temporary, and the price they have paid has been freedom and democracy for the people of Iran. Now, following the Antwerp trial, the EU will have to reassess completely its relationship with the criminal mullahs regime. The verdict in Antwerp today proves what we have known all along. The Iranian people are being governed by gangsters who will not hesitate to assassinate, bomb, maim, torture, and kill their opponents at home and abroad. The only way to restore peace, justice, democracy, and freedom to the people of Iran, and to the Middle East, and to the world, is to remove them from power and indict them for crimes against humanity in the international courts of justice. It's for this objective that I support the main opposition movement, the PMOI, MEK, and their brave supporters in Ashraf 3 and across the whole of Iran. Today's victory is only the start. The mullahs are finished.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. At this point, I have the privilege of introducing another great friend of the Iranian resistance, former Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ambassador Robert Joseph.
Good day. Iran's terrorist diplomat, Assadollah Assadi, and his 3 accomplices have been found guilty of the attempted bombing of the Free Iran gathering near Paris in 2018. a gathering of tens of thousands of men, women, and children who came together to celebrate their vision of a free and secular Iran. This conviction should stand as an object lesson for all governments conducting relations with the regime. Following the arrest of these individuals on the day of the planned bombing, the Belgian State Security Agency, working closely with authorities in France, Germany, Austria, and elsewhere, conducted an in-depth 2-year investigation of the attack, an attack that would have resulted in catastrophic loss of life, likely hundreds killed, and many, many more wounded and permanently disabled. If it had not been stopped, the terrorist attack that day could have been the deadliest in Europe's history. I attended the 2018 meeting along with hundreds of parliamentarians, human rights activists, and other guests from around the world. Clearly, the main target was Mrs. Rajavi, head of the National Council of Resistance of Iran and the host of the rally. As I was seated close to Mrs. Rajavi, I could well have been one of the casualties. For this reason, and for others, I became a party to the court and have followed the proceedings closely. At the trial, the prosecutor presented a mountain of evidence to support the charges against the defendants, including attempted terrorism with the intent to kill and activities within a terrorist entity. The principal findings revealed by the prosecution were, first, this was a deliberate act of state terrorism ordered by and conducted by the Iranian regime. Assadi, the principal defendant, was found to be a senior official of the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, the MOIS, assigned to the Iranian embassy in Vienna and masquerading as a diplomat. Second, Assadi was not acting alone. He was not a rogue agent. He was in regular contact with higher level officials in Tehran, receiving his orders directly from them. He took personal possession of the bomb, which was transported on a commercial airline from Iran and was designed by professionals to cause maximum damage. Third, Assadi, using his diplomatic status as a cover for his criminal activities, had been running a network of agents in Europe from his position in the embassy. There can be no doubt that the true identity of this terrorist diplomat was known within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, making the MFA complicit in this act of terror. This is the first time that an Iranian regime official has been caught red-handed in and convicted of a state-sponsored act of terrorism. This brazen act reflects the desperation of a regime that has lost all legitimacy with the people of Iran. Through pervasive corruption, through foreign aggression in support of dictators such as Assad in Syria, and through the bankrolling of terrorist groups, the religious dictatorship has squandered the wealth of the Iranian nation. Through its brutal repression of those seeking a democratic Iran, including the mass murders of more than 100,000 of its own citizens from the 1980s until the present, and through now its proven direct acts of terrorism in Europe and around the globe, the regime has committed crimes against humanity for which those responsible must be held accountable. Targeting a massive crowd to pursue the criminal objective of killing the leader of the democratic opposition is an abhorrent crime that cannot be tolerated by any civilized government. Now that the verdict has been handed down by the court, the judiciary has finished its work. It's now time for the governments to act decisively, knowing that further concessions to the regime will only bring more injustice to the Iranian people and more criminal and terrorist acts. For the EU, this should mean the adoption of a firm policy, including designating the MOIS and the IRGC as terrorist entities, withdrawing the legal status of all of the regime's agents in Europe, and reducing the level of diplomatic relations until the regime has demonstrated its commitment to forgo terrorist activities. For the Biden administration, the guilty verdicts of Assadi and his accomplices should weigh heavily in its review of Iran policy. This act of state terrorism should have a sobering effect. It should end any move to resurrect the appeasement policies of the past and dispel any false nostalgia about working with Minister Zarif as a moderate influence in the regime, as he, with no doubt, was aware of the attempted attack by MOIS operatives working under his auspices. The new administration must uphold the values that it espouses. If the leaders of free societies fail to hold the perpetrators responsible, including at the highest levels in Tehran, it will only encourage more terrorist attacks and make us complicit in them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Joseph. We are now glad to bring to you another truly great friend of the Iranian resistance, a leading member of the British Committee for Iran Freedom. Please welcome Dr. Matthew Alford.
Dear colleagues and friends, today is an important day, a historic day in the fight against terrorism. Now, for the first time ever, an accredited diplomat of the regime in Iran, the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, is not only caught in the act of terrorism, but also held accountable for his crime intended to bomb the Free Iran gathering of the NCRI in Paris, targeting the NCRI president-elect and opposition leader, Mrs. Maryam Rajavi. I personally attended the annual gathering in Paris in support of a free and democratic Iran in previous years, where tens of thousands of people have also participated, including many parliamentarians from Europe, the United States, and across the world. So successful, the attack could have caused major bloodshed and killed many people, reminiscent of an ISIS-style terrorist bombing. But luckily, the security agencies and police in France, Germany, and Belgium were able to stop the attack and prevent another terrorist tragedy in Europe. Now, with the Iranian diplomat behind bars, it would be a mistake to believe that this case is over and closed. No, this case has only just begun, because we now know that the main culprits and those ordering and truly responsible for this attack upon Iran's organized pro-democracy opposition in Europe are in Tehran. We know that after the trial and a 2-year investigation, that the convicted diplomat was in reality an intelligence officer, and that he did not act on his own, but rather followed orders from the regime's most senior authorities, including the supreme leader. According to reports, the decision to launch this terrorist attack was taken by the Supreme National Security Council, headed by the regime's president, Hassan Rouhani. Then it was confirmed by the Supreme Leader, Khamenei, and assigned to the Ministry of Intelligence and Security to implement the decision in close cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is headed by the proposed moderate, Hamid Zarif. Iran's state terrorism will never be stopped and defeated if these senior officials and leaders of the regime are allowed to enjoy impunity and escape accountability and justice. So while the small fish was caught, the time has come to go after the bigger fishes. The UK and its European allies must now work together to hold the regime's leaders in Tehran to account for their involvement in terrorism and all the other ancillary behaviours. Also, the UK and the EU must move ahead and prescribe without delay the IRGC and the MOIS in their entirety to prevent the regime and its terrorist organisations the resources and money they need to facilitate and carry out terrorist operations and to recruit agents in Europe. I'm now glad that more and more colleagues in the UK Parliament are understanding the importance of prescribing the IRGC and what a blow this will be for the regime's efforts to export and support terrorism. In this regard, I applaud my colleague, Tom Tugendhat, Chairman of the UK's Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee, in joining with us in this call and support his latest policy recommendation to the British government to prescribe the entire IRGC and to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to prioritise building watertight cases against human rights abusers based in Iran or acting for it abroad, in its next round of Magnitsky-style sanctions. I end my remarks today by congratulating Mrs. Rajavi, the Iranian resistance movement, and those, of course, in Ashraf III in Albania, and the people of Iran on this historic achievement and indeed victory. It would have been impossible without your work and endeavours for a free and democratic Iran. I stand with you all today, and I will continue to stand with you until the day Iran is free, and I will join you in a celebration in Tehran. As I've always said before, and as many of you know, we just say one final word, but 3 times. Huzzah! 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 Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to have with us the former Secretary of State for Wales, the former Brexit Minister, and the chair of the International Committee of Parliamentarians for a Democratic Iran. I'm honored to warmly welcome the Right Honorable David Jones.
I'm very pleased to be with you today for this important conference. And I'm particularly pleased that it's attended virtually by Mrs. Maryam Rajavi and residents of Ashraf III. This morning's verdict of the Antwerp court in the trial of the Iranian diplomat Assadollah Assadi and his 3 accomplices, who were sentenced to maximum terms of imprisonment for terrorist offences, is an event of the most profound international importance. It puts an end to the false narrative that the acts of terrorism of which they were accused were the work of hardliners or so-called rogue elements within the Iranian regime. Assadi is an accredited diplomat, and therefore the entire regime must answer for his actions, including the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Javad Zarif. After today's verdict, we in the United Kingdom are now looking to the British government to announce what action it will be taking to counter Iran's state terrorism, which has now been shown beyond doubt to pose a serious threat to the security of the United Kingdom and Europe. One immediate step should be for the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, to give urgent consideration to proscribing the IRGC in its entirety as a terrorist organization, a move that was recently recommended by the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee and has wide cross-party support in both houses of Parliament. There are growing calls from parliamentarians for Dominic Raab and the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office to work with the Home Office to pursue such a proscription, which should also extend to the entirety of Iran's intelligence ministry, part of which was proscribed by the UK and the EU in January 2019, for their part in the bomb plot against the NCRI's gathering in Paris. The UK and the EU should both toughen their current conciliatory policy on Iran. That policy has, to a large extent, emboldened the regime and has led it to believe that it could get away with terrorist activities on European soil, targeting the pro-democracy opposition and its leader, Mrs. Rajavi. Global Britain should take the lead in developing firm policy on Iran at an international level. This should include downgrading diplomatic relations with Iran and contemplating the closure of Iran's embassies and, where appropriate, the expulsion of diplomats, given the regime's role in promoting terrorism on European soil and holding British and European citizens hostage. Any return to a normal relationship should then be contingent upon the verifiable dismantling by Iran of its terrorist apparatus and credible undertakings not to engage in state terrorism again. Finally, I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the work of the NCRI and its president-elect, Mrs. Rajavi. This is undoubtedly an historic day for the Iranian people and the popular struggle for a free and democratic Iran. And congratulations also, too, to the law enforcement agencies on the European continent. Their hard work and professionalism has ensured that those who terrorize the people of Iran and seek to export their terrorist activities are brought to justice. My best wishes to the people of Iran and the cause of justice in that great country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Right Honourable David Jones, for those wonderful remarks. We now have with us a member of the Human Rights Commission of the Federal Parliament of Germany and a great supporter of the Iranian cause for democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Martin Potselt.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin Rajavi, meine lieben Freunde. Jetzt hat das
President
Gericht
Rajavi,
verurteilt.
dear friends,
Die Terroristen Assadi und seine 3 Komplizen sind verurteilt.
the court in
Damit das gesamte
Belgium
Terrorregime der Mullahs.
has brought
Ich
its
sagte in der
verdict.
Vergangenheit immer wieder,
The whole regime of
mit Assadi
mullahs
sitzt
has
ein-
been convicted. That's what I always say with us. Sorry, I'm not getting any more sound. I can't hear.
für die Opfer des Terrors. Ein Sieg für die Menschen im Iran.
That has been a victory for the victims of terror. It has been a victory for resistance in Iran. My congratulations. Independence of justice has been defended. It has been a victory that has taken place in Europe. But in this trial was not only about Assadi and his accomplices.
Mit dem Staatsterrorismus des Irans.
It's also about Europe, how Europe will deal with state-promoted terrorism in Europe. The EU has some responsibility in this process. For how long? For too long, Europe has tolerated the abuse of diplomatic status in Europe, promoted by the Iranian regime. Germany seems to be one of the centers of the actions of the regime. So-called Iranian diplomats are guiding or have been guiding a terrorist apparatus, and until this is stopped, we will be in danger. The EU has to act. There have to be diplomatic and political consequences. Diplomatic relations will have to be interrupted or will have to be weakened after this conviction. The structure of Iran is still present. It's present in individual terrorists and also in so-called cultural centers, like the Islam Center in Hamburg. They are all part of the terrorist apparatus in Europe. That has been proved by this trial and by the verdict. Those Iranian embassies which are within the terrorist network will have to be closed, and all those who have participated in terrorist acts will have to be tried and judged. The foreign minister of Iran tried to hide the truth. Thus, this has been proved during the trial, and therefore the foreign minister as well will have to be judged. There has been a long discussion about nuclear power. We should not be victims of the regime's lies again. Terrorism is in the DNA of this regime, and we have to react. Tehran only understands the language of strength. So we really must close down all those institutions that are involved with terrorist acts committed by the regime.
Joining us now from the US is a strong supporter of the Iranian resistance, former U.S. Special Envoy to the Northern Ireland peace process. With utmost pleasure, I welcome Ambassador Mitchell Rees.
I'd like to talk today about the trial of Assadollah Assadi, a so-called diplomat representing the Islamic Republic of Iran, and 3 of his accomplices. They were charged with attempting to transport explosives that would blow up a gathering of tens of thousands of free Iranians and hundreds of dignitaries who were gathering outside Paris in June 2018. My name is Mitchell Rees. I was at that gathering that June and could have been among the victims of this terrorist attempt had it been successful. So I would first like to thank the French, Belgian, and other police and security services who uncovered this terrorist plot and prevented a humanitarian catastrophe from taking place. I would also like to thank the Belgian and EU officials who bravely defied threats of additional violence from Tehran should this trial go forward. They are all to be commended for their courage. We need to ask ourselves, why did the Iranian regime so fear this gathering outside Paris that it was willing to risk alienating all of Europe and all civilized people around the world by engaging in such an act of blatant terror? The answer is clear. The gathering was organized by the NCRI and MEK, organizations that have been working tirelessly for decades to bring about a democratic Iran based on truly free elections with rule of law and respect for all Iranian citizens. The values that the NCRI and MEK represent are universal values enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. These values, however, represent an existential threat to the decades of misrule and tyranny by the mullahs and their foot soldiers of the regime. They fear these values. They fear the NCRI and MEK. So they feel they must respond the only way they know best, with violence and terror. They seek to silence all opposition by force. And that's why this terror operation was approved at the very height of the Iranian regime. Because today's leaders in Iran know that terror is the only way that they can maintain their grip on power. History tells us that such an approach is destined to fail. Regimes that have defied the will of the people do not last. This regime, too, is destined to fail. Every attempt to silence their critics by violence, whether outside Paris or on the streets across Iran, proves that the mullahs understand and fear this historical truth as well. Now, no one knows when the day of reckoning for the mullahs will come, but we know that it is coming. We also know that our actions can accelerate the timetable for when this day does come. So what do we need to do now? First, with this trial, the proof of Iran's state sponsorship of terrorism is undeniable. The United States and every European government should immediately condemn the regime for this behavior. But beyond mere words, these governments need to take solid actions that demonstrate that this behavior will not be tolerated in the future. It's clear that Iran uses its diplomatic missions to support a global terror network. So every government needs to assess carefully all of Iran's diplomatic personnel around the world and expel all employees who are not engaged in purely diplomatic work. Also, the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, needs to be held accountable for what occurred by one of his so-called diplomats. He should not be invited to Europe. He should not be seen as a legitimate foreign ministry official responsible for negotiating diplomatic arrangements with other countries. Finally, all these governments and non-governmental organizations across Europe and the United States need to redouble their efforts to help the long-suffering Iranian people. Support for a democratic alternative inside Iran would communicate to brave Iranians that they are not alone in their struggle, that their voices are heard, and that the free world is with them in spirit and hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Micheris, for your support and your efforts. As I said, today is a historic day and is a victory for all freedom lovers in the world. You are one of the pioneers in this field, and the leaders of this regime must be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. We will continue our struggle until the end to establish freedom and democracy in Iran. Thank you very much. اجازه بدین که از تک تک شما که با حضور فعالتون این کنفرانس رو برای به ثبت دادن جهانی محکومیت رژیم بسیار پربار کردیم تشکر و قدردانی کنم.
I would thank you for everything you have done, all the lawmakers, all lawyers, distinguished personalities, politicians, supporters of the resistance, all the supporters of Ashraf who are connected from 3,000 points in 40 countries in this international conference have gathered today, and all the people of Iran whom I saw they are watching and calling in to this program live. This was, in fact, a trial, international trial that you created against the world's #1 terror sponsor state. As Michel de Vaucouleurs said, the verdict of this court is an example. She said, France and Europe, in this crucial moment, must stand up and respond to their responsibilities. Mr. Pandemako rightly said that this regime has taken hostage the people of Iran. Mr. Terzi said justice also must be applied to other crimes of this regime, including the massacre of 1988 of political prisoners in Iran. And Mr. Steve McCabe insisted that the regime must be denied diplomatic rights. Mr. Patrick Kennedy said the mullahs are a threat, a fundamental threat to the whole world. And Mr. Tom Ridge said the fear of the regime, of the democratic alternative, is more than ever growing. Mr. Michel Clément said this decision shows the righteousness of the Iranian resistance, and former Prime Minister Stephen Harper said, for freedom, democracy, and human dignity, we need to fight. And General James Jones concluded from the Belgian court that time has come to take a firm policy against the Iranian regime. And this must be to stand next to the Iranian people. And also Dr. Alejo Vidal-Quadras present this important conclusion that no more agreement can be done with this regime. And Mr. Wesley Martin said that the final reckoning day will come when the mullahs are overthrown. And also Professor Eric David added that again justice and law prevailed, and he said, I'm glad that this time justice was prevailed in my country, Belgium. Each of these very important conclusions shed light on this reality that the judgment of the Belgian court was far beyond just a legal ruling. Today, the Minister of Justice of Belgium said, Belgian justice and judiciary today has given an important message. He said the decisiveness of the court and our security forces proves our commitment to fight terrorism and stand in the fight against terrorism. So with this ruling, the Iranian regime's impunity has been removed, and that shows that the regime can no longer commit any crime without being punished for its crime. The impunity of Khamenei has come to an end. So this is a step in favor of human rights in Iran, in favor of Iranian people's struggle to obtain freedom and democracy. It serves the people in other nations in the region who are fed up with the mullahs regime's invasion of their countries. And also it serves the peace and security in the whole world and the region. For the Iranian resistance, this court, despite its very important achievement, is only the first step. We will continue our struggle until we have brought down the terror machine of the mullahs. We will continue the struggle until the full breakdown of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards and the repression machine. We continue our fight until we have brought Khamenei and the leaders of the regime to the table of justice. And this is a battle with no cessation. We will not stop. I thank you all of you, every one of you, each one of you who for hours and hours have been standing in the streets, in different cities or in different rooms in front of the court. You are ready, all of you who have connected yourself to this conference through so many different points in the world, and all members of the Mujahedin in Ashrafri from early morning till now have been participating in this great gathering for the first step for victory of justice. I thank you all.